Hey guys, welcome back to Wentworth Life and welcome to the next Prisoner installment. Now, in today's video, I am going to be reviewing Prisoner Cell Block H, Episode 9, The Bentley's Downfall. Now, in the last episode, Helen Masters had decided to stay in prison out of principle and to prove her innocence. Also, if you guys watched my last video, then you will know that I cannot stand Helen Masters. However, she does actually do some good in this episode. So, Helen, she ends up getting her solicitor to look into Lynn Warner's case and even tells him that Meg Jackson believes her story. So he ends up going to see Meg, who directs him to the officer in charge, and it's not long before the whole article hits the papers. Erica is absolutely furious, and I love it when Erica gets mad. She reminds me of an old school teacher that I once had. Erica doesn't want Lynn to find out that the investigation is no longer being pursued, so Erica orders the article to be cut out of the paper and orders Helen to keep her mouth shut. But when B manages to get an uncut paper from Eddie, B brings the paper into the dining room where Lynn ends up learning the truth that the case is closed, and she gets very upset. Meg tries to calm her down, and Lynn, she just starts to push her and shove her before Mum ends up calming her down. Oh god, is there not going to be any end to this storyline? Well, things take a slight turn in this episode. So, Mr. and Mrs. Bentley, they're at home, and this is where we learn just how toxic their relationship is. Mrs. Bentley does not trust her husband because he basically sleeps around, and it's made her very paranoid, and it's slowly making her insane. Mr. Bentley manages to persuade his wife to go and stay with her mother for a few days, just until the news article in the paper dies down, which she agrees to do. Now later on, Mr. Bentley invites one of his lady friends to stay over. With Mrs. Bentley out of the way, the pair of them end up spending the night together, but in the middle of the night, Mr. Bentley goes downstairs to get some champagne, and then Mrs. Bentley appears when she turns the lights on. She goes crazy, demanding to know who is upstairs in her bed. She then lets slip that it was her who buried Richie alive. Now, what's interesting about this is that Mr. Bentley honestly didn't know that his wife had done it. He thought it was Lynn Warner. So he ends up going to ring the police, and then Mrs. Bentley tells him that if he does, she will tell the police that he raped Lynn. Now, the pair of them, they then realize that Mr. Bentley's lady friend, Shelley, is at the top of the stairs and she has just heard everything. And I was like, yes, finally. Shelley leaves the house but later on returns with the police, and Mr. and Mrs. Bentley are then arrested. And Mrs. Bentley actually reminds me of one of those wicked witches in the films. What do you guys think? This is of course fantastic news for Lynn, and Helen's solicitor ends up delivering the good news. By the end of the episode, Lynn is released, but not before saying goodbye to Mum, and it's a really nice scene, to be fair. I'm glad that Lynn finally got the justice and the proof that she needed. Of course, Helen Masters is going to end up getting all of the credit on this one, even though it was technically the fancy woman who brought in the evidence. Talking of Helen Masters, Helen decides to give beauty classes to the women in order to create good publicity for herself, of course. There's a funny scene where Helen is taken to the governor's office just before the class is about to begin, and the women, oh god, they end up painting their faces and throwing powder everywhere, much to Helen's horror. I love the bit when she comes into the rec room, and I love the expressions on her face. Just when Helen thinks that her case is going really well, her assistant James drops a bombshell. He tells her that the night of the accident, he actually came back to the hotel to check on her, but she wasn't there, even though Helen said that she was in the hotel room all night. Also, the coat that the driver was wearing is missing from Helen's wardrobe. Now, James has the ammunition to basically lock Helen up for good, and he ends up blackmailing his way to to like a promotion into Helen's company, and he no longer wants to be her travel companion. Now I'm pretty sure Helen is going to have an ace up her sleeve. Marilyn and Eddie's relationship ended in disaster in this episode. So Marilyn comes back after the argument in the last episode, and they do end up making up, even though she did sleep with someone for money. I mean, Eddie just ends up forgiving her. I don't know how, but he does. Now later on, one of Marilyn's friends, Yvonne, comes around to have some drinks with her while Eddie is in work. And yes guys, I know, the actress playing Yvonne will later on play a much bigger character called Margot Gaffney. This happens quite a lot in Prisoner, where actors and actresses, they have multiple roles throughout the 692 episodes. When Eddie comes home, he has a row with Marilyn and she ends up leaving with Yvonne, and I think the final nail in the coffin is when she sends a heavy around to collect her things, and Eddie, he almost ends up getting his head kicked in, but Marilyn does tell the heavy not to hurt him, and I was just like, wow. It's really sad to see this relationship between Eddie and Marilyn just turn so sour and toxic so quickly. It's like one day they were fine and next minute it's just turned pure toxic. Karen was being her normal difficult self in this episode, just being a little bit of a pain in the ass and just being so negative and being horrible to Dr. Miller. Frankie was pretty quiet in this episode, pretty much just in the background for the most part, with the odd one-liners thrown in. I'm still counting down the episodes until we see the back of Helen Masters. I mean, this episode was mainly about Lynn Warner's wrong conviction storyline coming to a conclusion, which was great to see. Oh, I was actually like shocked with the amount of tits and ass that I saw in this episode. I mean, bear in mind, this was a 1979 episode, so I wasn't expecting all of this nudity. This was a much better episode than the last one, in my personal opinion. The last episode was heavily based on Helen Masters, but it evened out a lot in this episode. There was definitely a hell of a lot more going on rather than just like one focus on Helen Masters, so a huge improvement for me. My favourite part of this episode definitely has to be the moment where Mr. and Mrs. Bentley are finally arrested for what they did to Lynn. My least favourite moment would have to be, once again, anything involving Helen Masters. The sooner she's gone, the better. And I also know that once she has gone, there are some big episodes coming up, and I'm getting really excited to review these ones. Okay guys, well, I now want to know your thoughts on this episode. Cast your minds all the way back to when you first saw this episode. What did you think of it? What were your thoughts on poor Marilyn and Eddie busting up like this, and were you over the moon to finally see Lynn Warner get the justice that she deserved? Let me know all of your thoughts in the comments box below. Okay then, well, thank you all for watching this video. The next one is just around the corner, so keep your eye out on your notifications. Apologies that these videos have been late. I know I do like to get them out on a Saturday, but it's been pretty busy. But anyway guys, thank you all for watching. I'll see you all again very soon.